The wealthy man had always lived a life that seemed perfect from the outside. He was successful, with a flourishing business, a beautiful house in a peaceful neighborhood, and a wife who was warm and loving. His wife, Sarah, was his partner for years, and they had built a life together. They had children, a home full of laughter, and a marriage that everyone admired. To anyone looking in, they were the picture of happiness. But deep inside, the man, who we'll call Alex, felt something was missing. Despite having everything many people could dream of, he couldn't shake the feeling of emptiness that had settled in his heart. Alex had spent years working hard to build his career, and as the years went by, he grew increasingly distant from his wife. Sarah, who once had been the love of his life, had become more of a companion than a partner. Their conversations seemed to grow shorter, and the spark that had once existed between them seemed to flicker and fade. Alex couldn't pinpoint exactly when it started, but the more successful he became, the more he found himself longing for something more. It wasn't just about the wealth or status. It was the feeling of adventure, excitement, and youth that he missed. His life, though comfortable, had become predictable, almost boring. Sarah, though a wonderful woman, didn't seem to understand his growing restlessness. She, too, had become busy with her own life and responsibilities. The love they had once shared seemed to slip away without either of them truly noticing it. The distance between them widened with each passing day. They no longer shared the same interests, and when they did spend time together, it felt like they were simply going through the motions of a marriage that had already faded. Alex began to feel trapped. He started to entertain the thought of what life would be like if he could break free. There had to be more out there for him. He wanted to feel alive again, to experience the kind of passion and excitement he had when he was younger. The love he once had for Sarah was still there, but it had been buried under years of routine. One evening, after a quiet dinner with Sarah, Alex found himself out at a social event. It wasn't anything special, just another gathering of business people and acquaintances. But there, across the room, he saw her, Julia. She was younger, full of life, and had an energy that Alex found magnetic. She laughed effortlessly, her smile lighting up the room. For the first time in years, Alex felt a spark. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was the excitement, the thrill he had been missing. They exchanged a few words, and the chemistry was undeniable. He knew that meeting her had stirred something in him, something he couldn't ignore. As the days passed, Alex found himself thinking more and more about Julia. He told himself it was just a passing attraction, something that would fade as quickly as it had appeared. But he couldn't stop thinking about her. He began to feel guilty, knowing that his thoughts were straying from Sarah, but the pull was too strong. The emptiness he had felt for so long seemed to disappear when he thought about Julia. Slowly, Alex's dissatisfaction with his life grew, and he began to entertain the idea that perhaps he was meant to be with someone else. Someone younger, someone who could give him the excitement he was craving. That thought led Alex down a path he never imagined he would take. He began to drift further from Sarah, his conversations with her growing colder. The connection they once had faded, and soon, Alex made the decision to end his marriage. Alex made the decision to leave his wife, Sarah, with a heavy heart. It wasn't something he had taken lightly. In fact, he wrestled with his conscience for weeks, trying to convince himself that it was the right choice. But deep down, he knew something had changed within him. The connection he once had with Sarah had vanished, and though they had built a life together, it felt like they were no longer the same people they had been when they first fell in love. Julia, the young woman he had met at the social event, had become a constant thought in his mind. Her vibrant energy and carefree nature seemed like a stark contrast to his own life. He began to crave the excitement she represented, the fresh start she could offer. In her presence, Alex felt alive again, like he was rediscovering a side of himself he had forgotten. It wasn't just about physical attraction. It was the sense of possibility, the idea of starting over, of feeling young and full of potential again. As time went on, Alex grew more and more distant from Sarah. Their conversations became strained and uncomfortable. They both knew that something was off, but neither of them knew how to fix it. Sarah tried to hold on, to rekindle the love they had shared, but it felt like Alex was slipping away, emotionally detached. She could see that his heart was no longer in their marriage, and though she didn't want to admit it, Sarah knew the truth. The man she had built a life with was no longer the same. The man she had loved had changed in ways she couldn't understand. One evening, after a quiet dinner where Alex barely said a word, he found himself alone in his study, staring at the papers on his desk. His mind was elsewhere, thinking about Julia and the new life he envisioned with her. He told himself it was only a matter of time before he took the step. It was then that he realized that the distance between him and Sarah had grown too wide to bridge. The love they once shared had faded, and despite their best efforts, the bond they had wasn't enough to keep them together. The next day, Alex made the phone call. He asked Sarah to meet him at their favorite cafe, a place they had once enjoyed spending time together. When they sat down, Sarah looked at him with a mixture of confusion and sadness. Alex took a deep breath, knowing this conversation would change everything. "I think it's time we faced the truth," he said softly. "I don't feel the way I used to. I've changed, and so has our relationship. I don't think I can be the husband you deserve anymore." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded slowly, as if she had been expecting this moment. She had seen the signs too, felt the shift in their connection, and though it broke her heart, she knew deep down that Alex was right. They had grown apart. The conversation was painful, filled with the raw emotions of a marriage falling apart. But as they parted ways, there was an unspoken understanding between them. They both knew that this was the end of their chapter, and while it was a difficult choice, it was one that needed to be made. With Sarah now out of the picture, Alex felt a strange mix of relief and guilt. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure. He was ready to begin a new life with Julia. The promise of a fresh start, of excitement and new possibilities, was too strong to ignore. But little did he know, the decisions he made would lead him down a path he never expected. After the divorce, Alex felt both a sense of freedom and an overwhelming sense of guilt. His life had taken a dramatic turn, and though he had left Sarah behind, it wasn't easy to shake the weight of the decision he had made. His mind often wandered back to their life together, the years they had spent building a family, and the good memories they had shared. But the deeper he delved into his new relationship with Julia, the more he pushed those thoughts away. He was determined to move forward, to embrace the fresh start he had sought for so long. Julia was everything Alex had hoped for: young, lively, and full of energy. She made him feel like a younger version of himself, a man who still had dreams and ambitions. She was everything he had been missing in his marriage with Sarah. For the first time in years, Alex felt truly alive, filled with hope and excitement about the future. Julia seemed to understand him in ways that Sarah never could, and she made him feel special, admired, and wanted. They moved in together quickly, eager to start their new life. Julia's presence brought a breath of fresh air into Alex's world, and they spent their days exploring new places, traveling, and enjoying each other's company. The lifestyle they shared felt exciting, and Alex began to wonder if he had made the right decision after all. The rush of his new relationship with Julia made him forget the loneliness he had often felt in his previous marriage. But the quiet voice of doubt still lingered at the back of his mind. Was he truly happy, or was he simply running away from his past? As Alex settled into his new life, the reality of the consequences of his actions slowly started to set in. He was no longer in contact with his children, who had grown distant from him after the divorce. Sarah had taken on the role of a single parent, raising the kids without him, and Alex knew that his absence had created a void in their lives. He tried to push these thoughts away, telling himself that his happiness with Julia was enough. But deep down, he realized that he had neglected his responsibilities as a father. In the midst of all this, Alex's business continued to flourish. His wealth grew even further, and with Julia by his side, the two of them became a well-known power couple in their social circles. They attended lavish parties, traveled to exotic locations, and lived a life that many envied. To the outside world, they were the perfect couple, the ones everyone aspired to be. But beneath the surface, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. His guilt about abandoning his children was always present, but it was easier to ignore when he was living in the moment with Julia. He told himself that he deserved this happiness, that he had given everything to his marriage with Sarah, only to find himself in a place of stagnation. But the question kept coming back to him. Was this truly what he wanted, or was he simply chasing something that would never bring him lasting peace? Despite the excitement of his new life, Alex found himself more reflective than ever. The deeper he got into his relationship with Julia, the more he began to question the decisions he had made. Had he made the right choice leaving Sarah? Was his new life everything he had hoped it would be? He didn't have the answers, but he was determined to move forward, to embrace what was in front of him and leave the past behind. But life had a way of surprising him, and it wasn't long before Alex would find himself facing a revelation that would challenge everything he thought he knew. As the years passed, Alex and Julia settled into their new life together. It was a world that revolved around the two of them, filled with luxury, adventure, and excitement. Alex couldn't deny that he had everything he thought he wanted. Julia was always by his side, her youthful energy and love for life a constant reminder of the freedom he felt. Their relationship was easy, without the struggles that had defined his marriage to Sarah. They had a rhythm, a dynamic that worked. They were happy. At least, that's what Alex told himself. Despite this, there were moments of doubt, small cracks in the picture-perfect life they had created. Alex, although living a life filled with joy and freedom, found himself occasionally reflecting on the past. He still thought about his children, his two kids who had grown up without him. He knew that Sarah had done her best to raise them on her own, but it weighed on him. There was a part of him that felt as if he had abandoned them when they needed him most. Yet, whenever Alex reached out to reconnect, his efforts were met with resistance. His children had built lives of their own, and his absence had become a part of their story. They had been hurt by the way their family had fallen apart, and no amount of wealth or fancy gifts could erase the sting of being left behind. His attempts to make amends were coldly received, and he realized that repairing those relationships would not be easy. Julia, on the other hand, seemed completely unbothered by the past. She was happy to have Alex to herself and to live the life they had built together. She had her own circle of friends, a social life that matched Alex's, and she loved their lifestyle. But even Julia, with all her charisma, couldn't fill the gaps that Alex felt in his heart. He had created a life that looked perfect from the outside, but the internal struggle continued to weigh on him. Over time, the constant whirlwind of events, travels, and social gatherings began to feel hollow. Alex had hoped that the excitement of a new relationship would give him the fulfillment he longed for, but the more he lived it, the more he realized it wasn't enough. His life had become a series of moments, fleeting and filled with superficial pleasures, but they didn't provide the lasting satisfaction he craved. One evening, as he sat alone in his office, staring at the papers on his desk, the phone rang. It was Sarah. Though he had tried to avoid taking her calls, this time, something told him he should pick up. "Alex," Sarah's voice came through the phone, softer than he remembered, yet filled with a kind of certainty. "I think it's time we talk about the kids." Her words caught him off guard. He had avoided facing this reality for so long, hoping that time would heal the distance between him and his children. But Sarah had a point. If he truly wanted to be a part of their lives again, he couldn't keep hiding behind the excuse that he had a new life now. The guilt that had been eating away at him surfaced once more, and he realized that he had to take responsibility for his past actions. "I've been thinking about them a lot lately," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "I know I've made mistakes, but I want to try to fix things. I owe them that much." There was a long pause on the other end of the line before Sarah spoke again. "They're still hurt, Alex, but if you really want to make it right, it's going to take time. They need to see that you're sincere." That conversation was a turning point for Alex. It reminded him of what truly mattered. No matter how much wealth and success he had, it couldn't fill the void he had created in his family. And now, more than ever, Alex knew that the path forward wouldn't be easy. If he wanted a future with his children, he would have to confront the past head-on, and he would need to prove himself in ways that went beyond the wealth he had accumulated. His life, it seemed, was far from the fresh start he had envisioned. Instead, it was an opportunity for redemption, a chance to rebuild what had been lost. But whether it would be enough to heal the wounds he had caused remained to be seen. Years passed, and Alex found himself caught between the life he had created with Julia and the reality of his fractured relationship with his children. The guilt, which he had tried to push aside for so long, was now a constant presence in his thoughts. No amount of success, travel, or luxury could make him forget the family he had left behind. Despite his best efforts to move forward, there was a part of him that felt incomplete, as if something essential was missing. Julia, though a supportive partner, didn't fully understand Alex's internal struggle. She was content with their life together, and she encouraged him to focus on the present. She often reminded him that they had built something special, and that they shouldn't let the past drag them down. Alex wanted to believe her, but the nagging feeling of regret never left. Every time he saw his children's photos on social media or heard news about them through mutual acquaintances, the distance between them seemed even more unbearable. One quiet afternoon, as Alex sat by himself at home, he received a call that would change everything. The voice on the other end of the line was unfamiliar, yet it stirred something inside him. The voice introduced itself as the lawyer of his ex-wife, Sarah. Before Alex could ask why she was calling, the lawyer explained that there had been an unexpected situation. "We have some news, Mr. Alex," the lawyer began. "It's about your children. They've been asking about you recently, and, well, it's complicated." The words caught Alex off guard. For years, his attempts to reconnect had been met with silence or coldness. Now, to hear that his children were asking about him brought an unexpected rush of emotions. The lawyer continued, telling him that his children had grown into young adults and had questions about the man who had once been their father. They wanted answers, but they weren't ready to let him back into their lives just yet. Alex's heart raced as the lawyer explained further details. His children had recently discovered something that shocked them. They resembled him more than they had ever realized. Through photos they had stumbled upon, they began to see how much they shared in appearance, mannerisms, and even personality traits. And with that realization came a mix of emotions: curiosity, confusion, and perhaps a bit of anger at the man who had been absent for so long. The lawyer mentioned that the children had planned a meeting with Alex, an opportunity for him to explain himself and, hopefully, begin to rebuild the bond he had broken. The lawyer was careful to emphasize that it would not be easy, and that the kids needed to hear the truth from him before they could consider a relationship with him again. Alex's mind was racing. He couldn't believe that after all these years, his children were giving him this chance. A wave of hope flooded over him, but it was quickly followed by doubt. What could he say to them? Could he undo the hurt he had caused? Was it too late to repair the damage? That night, Alex shared the news with Julia, who seemed more excited than he expected. Julia, always optimistic and supportive, encouraged Alex to seize the opportunity. She believed that this was the moment he had been waiting for. She reminded him that while the past could never be changed, the future was still his to shape. The next few days were filled with anticipation and nervous energy. Alex prepared himself mentally for the meeting, unsure of what to expect but determined to make things right. He knew it would be difficult. His children had every right to be angry, and he would have to prove that he was committed to being there for them, no matter what. As the day of the meeting approached, Alex found himself reflecting on the life he had built with Julia. He realized that no matter how much he cared for her, his true happiness lay in healing the rift with his children. He had spent years chasing the idea of a perfect life with Julia, but in the end, it was the connection with his children that mattered most. With a mixture of hope and fear, Alex set off to meet his children. It was a chance to face his mistakes, apologize for the years of absence, and begin a new chapter in his life. A chapter where the past could be acknowledged, but the future was still open for redemption. Alex arrived at the cafe, the meeting place his children had chosen. His hands were sweaty, his heart racing as he thought about what was to come. The quiet nerves that had been building up inside him for weeks now felt like a roaring storm. He had imagined this moment 1,000 times, but nothing could prepare him for the reality. What would he say to his children? What would they say to him? He took a deep breath, trying to calm himself as he sat at the table, his eyes scanning the door. The cafe was busy, filled with the usual chatter of people enjoying their drinks and meals, but Alex felt like the world around him had gone silent. Every sound seemed distant, every movement around him blurred. His mind was focused solely on the door, waiting for his children to walk through it. Finally, the door opened, and in walked two familiar faces. Alex's breath caught in his throat as he saw his children for the first time in years. They had grown into young adults, their faces still carrying the echoes of their childhood, but their expressions were different now, harder, more guarded. They had every right to be. Alex hadn't been there for them, and no amount of time could erase the years of absence. They hesitated for a moment as they entered, clearly unsure of how this meeting would go. But as their eyes met Alex's, there was an unspoken acknowledgement. The years apart had created a distance between them, but there was still a spark of recognition. They had inherited his features, the shape of his eyes, the way they looked when they were deep in thought, the way they smiled, even if it wasn't quite as warm as it used to be. "Dad?" One of them asked quietly, their voice a little uncertain. It was as if they were testing the word, unsure if it still had the same meaning. Alex stood up slowly, his throat tight. He wanted to say so much, but words seemed inadequate. "Hey," he managed, his voice sounding unfamiliar to himself. He was seeing his children for the first time as adults, and it felt like they were strangers, yet not strangers at all. They had once been the center of his world, and now they were the key to a future he wasn't sure he could have. They all sat down together, the tension in the air thick and heavy. The silence stretched out between them, as neither Alex nor his children knew how to begin. Finally, it was his daughter who broke the silence. "Why did you leave?" she asked, her voice quiet but sharp, the question laced with years of pain. "What happened to us?" Alex felt the weight of those words, the truth of them cutting through him. He had no excuses. No matter what reasons he had told himself back then, the simple fact was that he had left them. He had chosen his own path, and in doing so, had turned his back on everything that had once mattered most. I don't know what to say," he began, his voice cracking slightly. "I made a mistake. I hurt you both, and I can't take back what I did, no matter how much I want to." There was a long pause as his children absorbed his words, their expressions unreadable. His son, the quieter of the two, leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "So what now?" he asked, the bitterness clear in his tone. "What are we supposed to do with all this? You've been gone for so long." Alex felt a pang in his chest at the rawness of their words. He could see the pain in their eyes, and he knew it would take more than a simple apology to fix what had been broken. He had missed their lives, their growth, the moments that had defined their childhood. He had missed birthdays, graduations, and every little thing that mattered. "I know it's not going to be easy," he said, his voice steadying. "But I want to try. I want to be a part of your lives again, if you'll let me. I can't change the past, but I can be here now. I just need the chance to show you that I can be the father you deserve." His children exchanged looks, their faces still filled with doubt. But Alex could see that they weren't completely shut off from him. There was a small part of them that still wanted to believe in him, that still wanted a relationship with the man who had once been their father. "I'm not asking you to forgive me right away," Alex continued. "But if you'll give me the chance, I'll prove that I can be here for you, not just with words, but with actions." The conversation wasn't easy. It wasn't a magic fix that would make everything right again. But it was a start, a fragile first step toward healing the wounds he had caused. His children didn't say much after that, but the ice had broken. It wasn't much, but Alex felt a flicker of hope. The journey ahead would be long and difficult, but for the first time in years, he believed that maybe, just maybe, they could rebuild something together. After the meeting, Alex was left with a whirlwind of emotions. The conversation with his children hadn't been easy, but it had been a start. The words they had shared, the pain and the doubts, they had been raw and honest. Alex knew it wouldn't be an overnight fix. He couldn't expect things to fall into place immediately. But the door had been opened, even if just a crack. He wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in years, he felt a glimmer of hope. The days following the meeting were filled with a mix of anticipation and uncertainty. Alex knew he couldn't just sit back and expect his children to welcome him with open arms. The trust that had been broken couldn't be rebuilt with a few conversations. It would take time, effort, and patience, things he hadn't always been good at. But now, more than ever, Alex was willing to put in the work. He couldn't undo the past, but he could shape the future. He reached out to his children again, this time with no expectations. He didn't want to pressure them, but he wanted them to know he was there. A simple phone call, a message here and there, small gestures that showed he was committed to being part of their lives. At first, the responses were cautious, but over time, there was a shift. His children began to open up, slowly at first, then more freely. They didn't forget the years of distance, but they could see that Alex was trying. They could see that he was sincere. One afternoon, Alex received a text from his daughter. It was short, but it was enough to make his heart race. "Dad, I'd like to meet again. We can talk more." The words were simple, but to Alex, they felt like a lifeline. It was a sign that they were starting to trust him again, that they were willing to give him a second chance. He quickly replied, agreeing to meet at a local park where they could talk in private, away from the distractions of the world. When the day arrived, Alex stood by the entrance to the park, nervously glancing around. He was excited but also anxious. What would it be like to sit with his children again, to face them as the man he was now, not the man he had been when he left? He didn't know what they had planned to say, but he knew he had to be ready for anything. Soon, his children arrived, walking toward him with a sense of uncertainty in their steps. The awkwardness was palpable, but Alex could also sense something else, a small bit of hope, just like he felt. His daughter was the first to speak, her voice more relaxed than it had been during their last meeting. "We've been thinking a lot about what you said," she began. "And we want to try, too. We don't know how long it will take, but we're willing to give this a shot." Alex's heart swelled with emotion as he heard those words. They weren't offering him full forgiveness just yet, but it was a step forward. It was a step that he hadn't expected, and it made him believe that maybe, just maybe, they could start to rebuild the connection that had been lost. The conversation flowed more easily than Alex had anticipated. They talked about their lives, the things they had missed out on, and the pain they had carried. Alex didn't try to excuse his actions or make them feel guilty for their anger. Instead, he listened. He listened to everything they had to say, and he acknowledged the hurt he had caused. It wasn't about fixing everything in one conversation. It was about understanding, about showing up and being present. As the meeting came to a close, Alex felt a sense of calm he hadn't felt in a long time. He knew the road ahead would be long. There would be more tough conversations, more rebuilding, and more moments of doubt. But for the first time, he felt like there was a chance for redemption, a chance for his children to see him not as the man who abandoned them, but as the father who was trying to make things right. The meeting wasn't the end of their journey, but it was an important chapter, and for Alex, it was a reminder that no matter how broken things seemed, there was always an opportunity to heal. It wouldn't happen overnight, but he was willing to be patient. He was willing to prove, with time and consistency, that he was the father they deserved. And in that moment, that was enough. Months passed since Alex's first attempt to reconnect with his children, and while it had been a slow and often difficult process, there were signs of progress. The conversations had become more frequent, and the awkward silences were replaced with laughter and shared stories. His children, though still cautious, were starting to trust him again, little by little. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and for the first time in a long time, Alex felt like he was moving towards something meaningful. There were still moments of tension. Alex knew that rebuilding a relationship with his children wasn't something that could be rushed. There were old wounds that hadn't fully healed, and there were times when his children's anger would resurface. He didn't expect them to forget the past, and he didn't expect everything to be smooth sailing. But what he did know was that they were beginning to see the effort he was putting in. He was no longer the man who had walked away all those years ago. He was someone who was showing up, day after day, trying to make things right. One weekend, Alex invited his children to his home for a small family gathering. Julia, understanding the importance of the moment, had been supportive, offering encouragement and even helping with the preparations. It was a quiet gathering, nothing extravagant, but for Alex, it meant the world. He wanted his children to see that he wasn't just a distant figure in their lives, but a father who cared about their well-being and wanted to be part of their world again. As his children arrived, Alex felt a nervous excitement. He had spent so many years wondering if he would ever have a moment like this again, a chance to truly be present in their lives. His daughter was the first to hug him when she walked in, a hug that was a little hesitant at first, but grew warmer as it lingered. His son followed, his handshake firm, but there was something in his eyes, a recognition that, despite everything, his father was trying. And that meant something. Throughout the evening, they shared stories, laughed at old memories, and even joked about the awkwardness of their past. It wasn't perfect, and there were moments of discomfort, but Alex could see the change. There was a sense of connection that had been missing for so long. His children were no longer just faces he saw in old photographs or people he thought about from a distance. They were there, in the room with him, and for that, Alex was grateful. Later in the evening, after the meal had been finished and the dishes cleared away, Alex found himself sitting on the porch with his son. They didn't say much at first, just enjoying the quiet of the night. The stars above seemed brighter than ever, as if they too were bearing witness to this small but significant moment in Alex's life. Finally, his son spoke. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice softer than usual. "It's still going to take time for things to feel normal, but I'm starting to understand. It's not easy, but I see you trying." Alex nodded, a lump in his throat. "I can't change the past, son. I know that, but I'll keep trying. I won't give up on you." His son didn't say anything more, but the silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was understanding, a moment of mutual respect and acknowledgement of how far they had come. They didn't need to say everything. They both knew that the journey wasn't over, but it was a step forward. And sometimes, that was all that mattered. As the night came to an end, Alex found himself reflecting on everything that had happened. It had been a long road, filled with regret, guilt, and heartache, but it had also been a road of growth. He had learned that healing didn't happen overnight, that forgiveness couldn't be rushed, and that love, no matter how strained, could find its way back if both sides were willing to work for it. Alex knew that the path ahead wouldn't always be easy, but for the first time in years he had hope. Hope that with time, his relationship with his children could be fully restored. It wouldn't be perfect, but it would be real, built on effort, honesty, and a desire to make things right. And for Alex, that was enough.